Welcome back to Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we're going to be revisiting a topic that we covered kind of earlier on in the series, which is first we covered ego and shadow, but now I want to kind of focus in on what the shadow really is, seeing as so many people in the field of philosophy and psychology really reference this aspect of human mentality, such as Carl Jung and Freud, all these guys who really dug deep into how things like hypnosis or subconscious mind works in terms of how it affects our life and how it affects our behavior. So in terms of this and how we apply it to ourselves, maybe we'll get into that a bit later in the episode. But today I'm just going to start off by kind of revisiting some of the concepts we've already covered. So ego, as we know, maybe we could get the first picture up, is just kind of that element of yourself that you are aware of to the external world. You see persona here, which is kind of the mask that people see in terms of who you almost come off as, but it's not the real you, right? So there are elements to your personality that appear surface level to other individuals, and they're able to pick up about your personality, but it might not be reflective of who you actually are. On the other side, ego is really that sense of understanding that you have about yourself, who you know you are, right? Or the aspect of yourself that you are aware of, right? Shadow is the element or the aspect of your mentality below the surface. So you can almost think about like the iceberg analogy, and this is used for things too, like the internet, right? When they talk about like dark web and deep web and all those other aspects of the internet. So it's below the surface, right? It's not the like 5% of the internet or whatever that is like visible on the surface level, but it's all those aspects below. So it's the same thing for human consciousness. You have this side of somebody's personality which is hidden almost even to them as well, right? So the aspect of doing things like hypnotherapy or regressive therapy or EMDR, or I think it's EMDR, or psyche or holographic repatterning, or what's the other one called? Neuro-linguistic programming. All of those are subconscious modalities that are meant to interact with that hidden aspect of yourself, right? So you can perform not only self-reflection, but also self-development and change and progression towards whatever goal or aim you are aiming to create within your experience, right? So that's quite a bit of information there to actually process about the way the human consciousness works. Because not only are we talking about an aspect of ourselves that for the most part we are not even aware of. I would say majority of people are not aware of this on a daily basis. And even for people who are aware of it, they're typically only aware of a certain percentage of that. So typically things that reside in the shadow are things like trauma, fears, hidden desires, anything that, especially in the realm of the 21st century, becomes like tabooed or outside of societal norm. They all fall into this aspect of the shadow. The shadow is really a self-defense mechanism, and it's built on the concept of fragmentation of a personality. So essentially what happens is, like, maybe you're when you were young, you were told in the store, like, oh, you do not deserve, or whatever, like when you were out and about with your like parents or whatever, and they made you feel like you were not worthy of something, right? So typically for the most part of people who have that type of experience, it doesn't reside at a conscious level where they're consciously aware of that always, but it resides in this element of the shadow where it's beneath the surface. It's there, but it's not visible, right? So, and a lot of times people might wonder in life, like, oh, well, I'm trying to do this thing, but I can't get anywhere, right? And it all comes from these almost like little toxic seeds planted around the plant, which are almost parasitic and they feed off the plant, right? So you can almost think of it as like a parasite almost, right? To a degree. It's almost like how like in a sense where like mosquitoes or like the myth of a vampire, where a vampire essentially is stealing like life energy or the force of a human being or some being in order to survive. It's a parasitic relationship based on symbiosis, or one-way symbiosis anyway. Like the opposite term where both of them are mutually symbiotic is called mutualism, which is known in biology and other forms of science. But interestingly enough, that this one-way symbiosis, or I guess you can just say symbiosis, is essentially this aspect of what the shadow represents. It represents this hidden aspect of your mentality, which most people are not aware of, and it dictates things behind the scene. It's almost like the hidden puppet master that is like, like you could be in the role of the main character or whatever in the story, but it's like outside the story, there is like the directors and the producers and the narrators of that story who are governing how it goes. And that, to a degree, is how the shadow operates as well. It's not necessarily like it has all the power, but if you're not aware of it and you neglect to be aware of it or give it almost the respect it deserves, it almost becomes like this control freak that attempts to take over, right? So you're really dealing with almost like the power-hungry ruler here, that is attempting to take over the land, right? Or scourge the land, right? So, yeah, that in a nutshell is a lot of how the shadow is typically depicted. And I'm not saying the shadow is inherently bad. And a lot of times in like spirituality nowadays, like they get into this whole thing of like ego death and whatnot, which is the attempt to reform the element of the shadow. But I don't really believe that that is well represented in today's culture, because of the concept that both ego and shadow are necessary for the survival of not only like a human being, but life in general, right? And the balance of nature, really. And the aspect of that which is traditionally missing is that all of these elements need to be treated with respect. And the reason why you even get this fragmentation of consciousness in the first place, which leads to this separation of ego and shadow, is because there is a lack of respect for the self there, which is created by the external environment, by the parents in the store telling the kid, you do not deserve, right? It didn't come from you. It's not something that you inherently put upon yourself, like you didn't choose to be in that situation, but the mind just downloads that information and it really doesn't care where it came from. And that's the somewhat paradoxical thing about the mind, is that a lot of the time it absorbs information that is not always necessarily beneficial to its own survival or own progress, right? But there's a flip side to that as well. The flip side is that you can derive benefit from that, because it also means that anything you focus on for a long enough duration, you will integrate into your life in some way. And this is why things like hypnotherapy and all these subconscious modalities work, because it's based off intentionally interacting with the subconscious mind repetitively to create subconscious and conscious grooves in the mind to reprogram the way your mind thinks and functions and where it directs its energy to. So another way to look at that is, if you if you really like say a TV show or whatever, and you keep watching that show over and over again, you will integrate parts of that show into how you see the world, right? So this is a big thing with like even things like Dragon Ball nowadays, right? Like, everybody sees like edits on Instagram or whatever, and they want to be like Vegeta, right? So because he's the proud Saiyan prince, right? And like that's the beneficial element of the mind, that if you watch that enough and you keep watching it and you keep looking at it, your mind just automatically downloads that into its programming, because it's not worried about that filtering aspect, right? So the only times where the mind really has this element of not doing that, or some resistance to doing that, or some kind of this almost fragmentation effect goes on, is when the mind is feeling fear or anxiety or anger, any of those lower emotions that lead to this fragmentation of the consciousness, which leads to the shadow being created. So in essence, what I'm saying is that if you have something that you want to do, or you want to be, or you want to put energy into manifesting, as they say, then watch that, listen to that, revise that over and over and over and over and over again, because that, like, it sounds simple. Like, a lot of times, like, as human beings, I don't think we traditionally understand this concept, because it seems so foreign that anything that simple can lead to change. But sometimes it's as simple as reviewing the thing that you want over and over and over again to make an imprint. And this is why a lot of times, like, even with like gym culture, right? Here, let me take a sip of water actually. So like, one of the things that people honestly miss about gym culture a lot of the time, like, there's part of the gym culture where it's like, you're dedicated to actually the grind and going consistently, and you understand that that's the way that things are built, by you showing up every day to the gym, or 5 days a week, or 3 days a week, or whatever your schedule is, showing up consistently those days, putting in the effort, and then over time you get results. But there's the other percentage of people out there, and this is probably a smaller percentage, where it's people who think that, there's some magical pill or magical supplement or something that you can take, pre-workout, BCAAs, creatine, fat-burning pills, omega-6, whatever, all this garbage that you don't really need. And, like, unless, like, maybe creatine, if you're a professional, like, athlete and you're at that level, then there's a reason for taking that. But there's the other portion of people who just want to see fast results, and they think there's some magical pill. No, there's no magical pill. There's no magical cure. It's like, I was watching this, I think I said this actually a couple weeks ago on the show, and I was watching something, I think it was with Andrew Huberman and Goggins, and they were talking about this concept that there's a cure to essentially your what you're battling or pushing up against in life. But the catch is, and listen to this, the catch is that the cure, or the antidote, it only works one day at a time. So like I said in the previous video, your cure or your antidote only works if you go to the gym, right? So if you go to the gym every day and you're consistent with that, the cure works. If you don't go to the gym, the cure doesn't work, right? Because you're not continuing that momentum and your direction of change, right? So, and sometimes it's not fair, really. It really isn't, because, like, for example, there's some people who are born with, like, good genes, like, they have a perfect jawline, or, like, they're just, like, built as strong as an ox, and they don't even have to go to the gym or work out or any of that stuff. And then there's people who go to the gym and put in all this effort, and they still see, maybe results that they're not completely satisfied with, but they're the ones working harder, right? And this is the same across all areas, right? That there's people who will have some predisposition to that thing, whether it's physique, whether it's mindset, whether it's ability to succeed in business or any other endeavor. And then there's somebody else who maybe has a different skill that they're beneficial at, but they want that other skill to be able to create a successful business or whatever, and they have to work really hard at it, right? So there is this element of working hard and consistency that plays in here, but the other aspect is that it doesn't have to be that way as well. The thing is that typically the reason why we push up against obstacles like this is that there's some barrier in here, some mental obstacle that prevents you from excelling at that thing, right? Like, some people think that, oh yeah, well, I can't, I can't do math or whatever, right? But it's not really so much that concept as much it is that you have some resistance somewhere that is in opposition to you being able to excel at that thing. Same thing for gym or whatever, right? You have some opposition to being in shape that is built on some subconscious belief that is preventing you from achieving that thing, right? It's like, let's take water, for example, which is has been proven to be somewhat magnetic in the way that it can be affected by magnetic fields. Let's say that's a neutral substance, right? Just for the analogy that we're creating here. So let's take water that's somewhat magnetic. You put a magnet near it, it will attract certain parts of the water to that, and it will change the orientation of the water. And now, let's say that instead of water, in this case, you have two magnets that are of the same pole pushing towards each other. So instead of one thing that is acting on something that's neutral, you have two things of the same polarity, which in magnetism repel each other, that are pushing against each other. So instead of you being able to affect something because that thing is neutral, you are now pushing against another force because there is a blockage there of some kind. You have a polarity which doesn't match to attract whatever it is that you want, right? So it's the same concept behind these blockages of the unconscious, right? Is that you have some kind of block that is preventing you from achieving that end, right? And typically that is why people struggle to achieve something, right? It's not because they're incapable of doing it or because they have the inability to learn that thing, but it's because there is a block that prevents them from doing those things, right? And it convinces them in their mind, even at a subconscious level, so much sometimes that you can't even see it. It's almost like a wall that would be right in front of you, but you can't see it because the mind doesn't register it, right? Because even though the mind is in its totality, it's acknowledging that thing is there. It's choosing not to see it. So in essence, that's really how the shadow can affect a individual's life, right? So the main point behind this is that when we start to understand these concepts, when we start to understand these processes within ourselves, we can actually create change and we can undo those blockages that are standing in the way of progress. And one of the ways we do that, as I said, is by showing it respect, by showing it understanding, right? Coming to it, trying to see where it's coming from, saying that, okay, well, I know that you are part of me in some way. I'm attempting to understand what lesson it is that you are trying to teach me. Because if you are really some part of me that is assisting me, we need to be able to communicate in a way that is going to lead to our overall benefit. And by doing that, what you really are doing is a similar process to what goes on in a computer when you're clearing it off, is this concept of defragmentation. So if you're on your computer and you're trying to make the computer run better, you can defragment the hard drive. So I don't know if the process is the same, but the name is the same, and what it means in terms of the consciousness is you're undoing these conscious cracks in your your mental totality, so you can be a well-rounded human being who has a clear sense of their individuality, and they're not segmenting parts of themselves, right? So this is why sometimes you even see it, like, sometimes I don't know, like, let's say the mom who's like, a really loving mom at home, and then she goes and, puts on her like pantsuit or whatever, goes to the office, and then she's like, hard ass CEO, right? But it's because she needs to fulfill that role in that environment, right? But the thing is that sometimes the people who are having this aspects to their persona, or maybe persona is not the right word considering we're using this diagram. I don't know, it's typically referred to in psychology as alter ego, right? Where typically you're in one setting and then you act in accordance with that environment. So, the loving mom is a loving mom at home. She goes to the office and then she knows it's business time. It's, it's time to actually like, grind or whatever, or, take care of business or whatever the thing is. But her demeanor about how she sees the world and how she's acting in that environment completely changes based on the environment that she's in, right? And what's going on here is the totality of your consciousness is segmented into different parts based on the environment that you're in. So the end goal out of understanding, shadow, ego, persona, all of this stuff, is to be able to culminize it into one thing, so that the mom at home realizes that she's the same person who goes to the office and is able to run the company and do all these things and make the coherent business decisions and whatever it is. So, but you're able to transfer through those states with fluidity. There's no like dramatic shift in how your thinking is. You think as a well-rounded human being who possesses all of these abilities and all of these aspects to their individuality, rather than almost becoming a different person as you enter each situation, right? So that's really the crux of that, right? And it's not uncomplicated, because there is a lot to human consciousness and mentality and understanding how these things really fit together. But the thing is that if you can understand this, and if you can integrate this into your experience of how you view the world, you will be a more not only well-rounded individual and establish your individuality with the sense of who you want to be in the world, but you will also have a greater understanding of your intuition and all these, like, what they consider almost like intuitive abilities that people have, right? So, being able to sense things, or being able to perceive stuff, or whatever, being able to have that instinct behind them that is able to essentially almost like sense what is going to happen, be in tune with your gut instinct, because you as a human being are whole, right? You're not fragmented into these separate parts of consciousness, right? So again, one of the ways I see this stuff, and I actually said this to myself actually years ago in my life, and I think all of us have this to a degree, those limiting belief systems, where I said, it's not your fault that this stuff has happened to you that has caused this effect, but it's your responsibility to course correct, or whatever the action is that you need to take to set you on the path you want to be on. So I'm just going to repeat that again. It's not your fault that these things have happened to you, that people have, whispered lies in your ear that you have the inability to do something, or you're not capable of this, or you're crazy, or whatever. All of this garbage that, people who are not truly invested in your success, or like, even if they feel that they're not really helping. All of these people who say this garbage to you, it's not you. It's not you. So again, it's not your fault that you've heard these lies that have been whispered in your ear, but it's your responsibility to course correct and tell yourself the truth. Tell yourself you are capable. Tell yourself you are worthy. Tell yourself you have the ability, right? And when you do that, you're well on your way to being who you want to be in the world. And that's really the, like, I think honestly that's the best that any of us can really hope for. So yeah. that was pretty deep even for me. But in essence though, I think that having a foundational understanding of these psychological aspects to how the mind operates is not only imperative, but it just feels better. It feels like something that is working like a well-playing symphony versus, like, the drums playing whatever tune they want, and then the wind playing whatever they want, and then the trumpets and the tubas just playing out of tune. So, and then the conductor is just like waving his hands and everybody's just doing what they want, right? So that's typically how a lot of the times the mind works, because the ability to get all those instruments on the same page is almost what I'm talking about here. It's the ability to have the shadow on the same page as the ego, on the same page as the persona. And persona, to a degree, you can't really always control. People are going to see you how they want to see you. But typically, if you have those other two within yourself in alignment, your persona is more well-rounded to the people who view you from the outside, because you are on the same page with yourself. You have an understanding of who you are, and you can be consistent in who that person who shows up is, right? So if you're somebody who has this fragmented consciousness that we're talking about with ego and shadow, where your consciousness is fragmented and you jump from these different states based on what environment you're in, how you feel, and what, like, blah, 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 then your persona is going to shift dramatically to the people who are around you, because they're going to say, well, there's no consistency with the way this guy shows up, because one day he's super happy and then the other day he's super angry and the other day he's like depressed, and this day he's like, I don't know, like just in rage, or mad at everybody for no reason, or projecting things, whatever. Like, there's no consistency in the way you are viewed by your external environment. But again, what I said, if you're on the same page with yourself, and you know who you are, you have an understanding of who you want to be, and you are on the same page with your unconscious about how you're going to fulfill that, then even if you have days where your emotional state slightly varies, where like maybe one day you're just not in the mood, where one day you're really in the vibe, where another day you're just like calm and relaxed, there's less drastic change between those states, which is what I'm saying here. And this almost goes into like what we say about physics when, we've talked about other concepts on the show, collapsing the wave function, right? Where, the wave collapses back into a particle, right? It's almost that same similar effect to that, where you are allowing that thing to be in the same state regardless, right? So you are limiting the amount of change that state of matter is geared to or is able to produce, right? So maybe we'll go into the second image actually, and we'll talk about, so here we have a diagram which actually this was something I don't know if it was the exact same diagram, but it was a similar diagram, which I had at a very earlier on episode of this show, where we were like maybe first or second or third episode or something like that, where we're talking about similar concepts of the ego and shadow. But essentially here, we're talking about inner world and outer world, persona, as you see here, the anima, and ego and shadow, and then you have the self in the middle, right? And the thing that I really want to make clear here is because, like, a lot of the stuff, like when we talk about spirituality, it always comes back to magic, right? You know, we've had a whole video that I was actually just rewatching again the other day, prior to doing this show today. It was like last night at like 2 a.m. I was rewatching this to make sure that I made this distinction between what I'm talking about here. So there are actually, I'm gonna elaborate on these as clearly as possible, or as clearly as I can, because it is a bit of a complex what's the word I'm looking for? Something to make tangible or make able to illustrate. So essentially, in creation, you have almost what's known as like the womb of life, the true darkness. So you can almost think of this as like empty space, right? Which has pure ability to create anything, which all things come from. All light, which is the basis of all things and our reality, comes from. So you can almost think of this as like the void, or like a black hole where there's just nothing, there's just pure blackness, pure darkness. So this is the true darkness of creation, what's known as the womb of life, which everything comes from. This is the feminine energy. And then from that darkness, from that destruction force, you have creation, which is the light. You have the force that is able to create anything, to materialize anything, right? So this is that creative force that is able to manifest and make physical and rejuvenate and all these aspects, right? This is the aspect of something like the sun, right? That masculine energy. So after that, now you have what is known as the false darkness. And what this is really the shadow here. It's the form of darkness, which is really a derivative of the light. So again, like we said, true darkness is like empty space, or like the void. The light is what comes from that infinite potential. And the false darkness is the shadow that is cast from the light onto something. So it's not true anything, it's vampiric. What that means is that it only exists by feeding off of something else. So it's the same thing like we're talking about with the shadow. The shadow can only exist because it's not an integrated part of the ego or of the self. I should say that, of the self, because the ego and the shadow only exist in relativity to each other. Like, it's almost like when you collapse that wave function, when you collapse the thing back into the state it's supposed to be in, the state of neutrality, the state of balance, the state of unity, you get the self in a whole well-rounded state. You don't get ego, you don't get shadow, you get the self. And that is the aspect of the consciousness that is the whole well-rounded integrated part. So the shadow ceases to be, because it's saying essentially that, okay, well, because all of this information is integrated into my personality, I don't have anything that I'm resisting or pushing up against, because I understand myself, I understand my fears, I understand my desires, I understand my emotions, my mentality, all of that stuff. There is no pushback force, there's no ego, there's no shadow. So you have this well-rounded aspect of the self, which ideally, if we can always move this way in the world, this would be the ideal state that we would exist in. And this is more so the ideal aspect of what it's talking about when it talks about ego death and stuff like this, right? It's talking about being able to reintegrate that stuff into your personality, into the self, so that you can have a more well-rounded view in life. This is why a lot of people take like psychedelics and drugs, and they go on trips. And just to make this clear, I'm not advocating drug use here. I'm just illustrating that this is some of the reasons why people take this, especially like people like philosophers or deep thinkers or anybody attempting to go on some kind of journey of exploration exploration of the self or attempt to understand the world or environment that they live in. This is typically why, because one of the things it does is it increases what is known as brain plasticity or neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself. And the reason why you see things like geometric shapes or whatnot on these trips is because that's how the mind almost conceptualizes this almost hyperspatial reality of how the human consciousness operates, with like geometric shapes and patterns and lines which converge to create things like, squares, circles, triangles, whatever, right? In essence, all energy is typically confined in some sort of geometric representation, right? In essence, I'm not going to dive too deep into that. The main thing that I'm illustrating here is that the reason why they take those things is to integrate the ego and the shadow back into the self, so you can almost come to this sense of peace and understanding within yourself and continue on in the world, release those traumas, those subconscious things holding you back that are not serving you. So that is kind of that, they even I'm not going to explain too much in them, but I'll just list a few, like, people go on like ayahuasca trips or DMT trips or psilocybin or whatever. All of those are used to create this state of higher plasticity, to integrate the ego and the shadow back into the self. And when you have that well-rounded self again, then you do not have that resistance pushing up against you, like I talked about in the analogy earlier with the water versus the similar pole on the magnet. When you have the similar pole on the magnet, it's like the ego and the shadow repelling each other. They don't want to create that change that is you want because there's a blockage there from the opposite side. But when you integrate those aspects back into the self, then it's like you bring the magnet towards water. There is no resistance in the polarity, right? So it magnetizes that thing in some way to the magnet, right? So in essence, that is kind of the basis of how these operate. And I would say that getting rid of that form of resistance is one of the most challenging things that a human being can ever do in their experience. Because when you do that, you realize that all the things that you have set in your mind in terms of your belief systems, your perceptions about the world, your discernment of how things operate, even things in your environment, your connection to nature, whatever, your sense of what you can and cannot achieve, even your sense of what is and is not possible, all of that dissolves so you can have a well-rounded understanding of the world. And of course, the reason why we have this aspect of ego and shadow created at the very beginning of time, in the sense of, when we were cavemen and we didn't have things to worry about in society, like bills and money and these all these societal norm stressors, which have really made hyperinflated this issue to a greater extent, right? And I'll give you a short example here. So let me drink some water first. So, like nowadays in the 21st century, especially with young people, a lot of times, like, we're always thinking about problems or, the future or whatever. Our mind's wandering left, right, up, down, back, forth, all of this stuff, right? And it's thinking about, oh, well, what's going to happen with my career? What do I have to do with school? Like, is this girl going to text me back? Blah, 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 right? Like, all of these different factors that your mind is constantly thinking about. And even stuff like, oh yeah, well, inflation is going up, blah, 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 all these factors about the world. Your mind is constantly rambling on garbage, right? But the way it was supposed to be, the way it was at the beginning of time when we're on this planet, when we were like cavemen grunting in a cave is that, oh damn, I need to be aware of if there is like a tiger nearby, because then I gotta run away. But the key point, and listen to this is the key point here, is that after that threat is gone or neutralized, or you kill the tiger and eat it, or you get away from the tiger or whatever, you escape the threat level is back to 0, that stress is gone. It's not meant to carry for a long period of time. It's not meant to be prolonged stress, right? So this is really the key difference here. The key difference is that, when there's the saber-toothed tiger chasing you, after the saber-toothed tiger is gone, everything is back to watching fire and hunting things and throwing rocks at stuff, right? Or grunting at each other and hitting each other over the head with clubs, right? So this is the concept that we're talking about here, that once the stress factor is gone, once that threat is gone, everything's back to normal, it's back to the baseline. But now in society, where things are so messed up because we're thinking about all of these factors that do not matter truly deep within ourselves, they only matter at a certain level or for a finite period of time, they have this effect where it's causing prolonged stress and these effects that are really not beneficial to our overall development and actually hindering whatever problem we are trying to find a solution to. So this is why, like, sometimes doing something as simple as, when people say, oh yeah, just take some deep breaths, or, breathe or relax, or, just let that tension go. This is why they're saying that, is because the body is caught up in the stress factors that it perceives from the external world, that your mind is telling your body that matters, but the body is not used to those things mattering for such a long time. So it wants to return to the state of equilibrium, which it's supposed to be at, which is the integrated self, but it can't do that because you have all these factors that it has on its mind, all right? So this is the basis of ego and shadow, and maybe we'll get the last image up now as we sum up the show. And this is the famous almost Carl Jung image where you have, the ego and shadow. So in a sense, that's really what the concept is of today. We talked about, even dark magic, which is, here, let me just make this distinguishment as we're approaching the end here. In magic, there's the left-hand path, which is the true darkness that I talked about. There's the right-hand path, which is the light. And then there is dark magic, which is the false darkness and the darkness of the shadow, which is not true darkness, it's dying light, or light that is sucked vampirically, right? So it's like a vampire, right? They can only survive off of the blood of other things, or the energy or life force of other things, right? They can only survive by that feeding process, by taking light from another source, right? But in essence, it's not either of those two true polarities. It's not darkness, it's not light. It's false darkness, it's shadow, right? So same thing with the consciousness here. That's how it operates. In essence, though, we've covered the left and right hand path, and then we covered that distinction between that black, white magic and dark magic. So there's that. We've covered ego and shadow. We've covered the integration back into the self. We've covered the ability to rewire your brain for the subconscious patterns that you actually want to facilitate and actually create within yourself, and the aspect of creating change as an individual and what happens when you become a individual and actually integrate those things back into the self as a whole. And the vision and clarity that comes with that, as well as the insight and intuition, so that you can move through the world with clear vision. So that is the show for today. I'm Ryan, right here on Moonstruck on Riot Radio. Follow us on DC Media Hub. check out my other channel, Sword of Mercury. Follow me on Instagram at top_sorcerer. I think from now on I will start linking all the links in the description below. I encourage you to tap that subscribe button and give a like if you enjoyed or it helped you in any way. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you would like to see in the future, if you like this stuff around psychology, whatnot. And yeah, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.